I sacrificed my own blood, because I believed I was doing it for God. But it wasn't God I served. It was ambition. It was vanity. And I was deceived by a man who promised elevation through death. This is a story of a beloved Lagos megachurch pastor who hides a horrifying secret. He buried his pregnant wife and twin daughters beneath the church altar. When a journalist begins investigating strange smells and ghostly sightings, a terrifying truth unravels. As the spirits rise, the city learns that even the holiest places can conceal the darkest sins. In the heart of the bustling city of Olikia, where street vendors hummed songs louder than their engines and billboards shouted promises of heaven and riches, stood a pristine megachurch known as Streams of Glory Ministries. It towered like a palace, a structure of glimmering glass and polished marble. At its helm was Pastor Josiah Daramola, a man revered not only for his fiery sermons but also for his magnetic charisma. The people called him Daddy J. To many, he was not just a man of God, he was the closest thing to divinity that the city had seen. Every Sunday, cars lined the streets like ants at a sugar mound. Celebrities, politicians, and business tycoons sat side by side with beggars and students, all hypnotized by Pastor Josiah's booming voice and promises of prosperity, healing, and miracles. Women brought him gifts. Men offered him lands. His prayer cloths sold out in minutes. His birthday was celebrated like a national holiday. The media adored him. Rumors swirled that he even cast demons out of a sitting senator's son on live TV. But behind the curtain of glory was a silence no one dared to speak of, the kind that trembled in the bones of those closest to him. His wife, Mama Glory, a quiet, modest woman with gentle eyes and a perpetual baby bump, hadn't been seen in public in over 6 months. Their 2 children, twin girls named Hope and Grace, once Instagram darlings of the congregation, vanished from social media just as quietly. When members inquired about them, Pastor Josiah simply smiled. "They are resting," he would say. "God is preparing them for a higher purpose." But one chilly Thursday morning, as the city street sweepers moved past the church's compound, one of them, an old man named Aya Sunday, noticed something strange, the sweet, sickening smell of decay rising faintly from the edge of the church's foundation. The next day, the smell had grown stronger. At first, people thought it was a dead animal buried somewhere near the church fence. Olikia was a city of secrets and silence. Bad smells came and went, and no one asked too many questions. But this one lingered, thick, cloying, and oddly human. Old Aya Sunday mentioned it to his daughter, who sold akara just across the street. She, in turn, told a customer who was a chorister at Streams of Glory Ministries. By evening, the rumor had begun to spread through the back alleys of the city that something wasn't right beneath the house of God. But nothing ever stuck to Pastor Josiah. He walked through scandals like smoke, untouchable and shining. That Friday evening, during vigil service, he preached a sermon titled, "Buried but Not Dead." His voice roared through the megachurch like thunder wrapped in fire. His eyes glistened as he shouted about how enemies may try to cover your destiny with the dust of the earth, but God would cause resurrection. The congregation screamed, danced, and cried. None of them noticed the faint scent rising from the marble floor near the altar, sweet and sour like rotten fruit. But among the crowd sat a young journalist named Sod Owolabi, watching him with narrowed eyes. She had been investigating Pastor Josiah for months after hearing conflicting stories about his personal life. She once interviewed a former nanny who claimed to have seen blood-stained robes inside the pastor's laundry basket. That nanny disappeared a week later. Sod had been silent since then, gathering evidence, biding her time. That night, as worshippers waved their hands in the air and spoke in tongues, Sod slipped away quietly into a restricted hallway at the back of the church. With a pen light and recorder in hand, she tiptoed down a narrow corridor that led beneath the pulpit. And that was when she heard it, a faint scraping sound beneath the tiles. Something was moving beneath the church. Sod's heartbeat thudded in her ears as she stood frozen in the dark hallway, her small pen light flickering against the concrete walls. The scraping sound continued, slow, deliberate, like nails against stone. She crouched low, steadying her breath, and leaned toward the wall. Just then, her fingers brushed over a thin crack running along the floor tiles. It was too perfect, too deliberate to be a natural flaw. Using the edge of a metal bookmark she had in her purse, she pried the tile gently. With a low creak, it lifted, revealing a hollow underneath. She peered in, complete darkness. Then, just as she was about to lower her flashlight into the opening, a cold hand gripped her shoulder. She spun around, eyes wide. It was Brother Caleb, Pastor Josiah's personal assistant. A tall, expressionless man with eyes that never blinked long enough to show emotion. "You are not supposed to be here, Sister Sod," he said, his voice low and firm. Sod smiled nervously, masking the storm within. "I got lost. I was looking for the restroom." Brother Caleb didn't blink. "This area is for ordained ministers only. Please, return to the auditorium." Sod nodded and slipped past him, but as she walked away, she slid the tile piece into her handbag. She wasn't done, not even close. Later that night, back in her apartment, she reviewed the audio from her hidden recorder. The scraping sound had been captured clearly. But at the end of the clip, there was something more, a woman's sob. Muffled. Weak. And then, "Don't leave us." Sod stared at the wall in disbelief. Something, or someone, was still alive under that church. The next day, Sod began digging into old records. She went to the city registrar's office and pulled up public birth and death records. What she found unsettled her. There was no death certificate for Mama Glory or the twins. No hospital record of miscarriage or stillbirth either. In fact, the last official record tied to Pastor Josiah's wife was a prenatal appointment at St. Bridget's maternity home, dated 7 months ago. After that, she vanished. She interviewed former church workers. One, a former keyboardist named Samson, said he had once heard a child crying during late-night rehearsals near the altar. When he mentioned it to Pastor Josiah, he was fired the next day and issued a non-disclosure letter he wasn't allowed to keep. Another, a gardener, told her he saw construction work happen late at night, digging under the altar, covering something with cement. They claimed it was for holy drainage, but he said the cement was mixed with lime and bleach, and that the smell wasn't holy. Meanwhile, whispers in the congregation began to grow. Why did Pastor Josiah no longer mention his family? Why did he cry when no one was watching? Why did dogs bark wildly every time they passed the front of the altar? But none dared ask. That Sunday, Sod returned to church, this time with a small infrared scanner hidden in her handbag. During worship, she pointed it at the altar floor. The results chilled her. Underneath the marble, there were human shapes, faint, buried, and definitely not mannequins. She snapped a photo and left before the final prayer. But what she didn't know was that Pastor Josiah had seen her. Pastor Josiah stood alone in his office, staring at the monitor where a security camera feed played on loop. He watched Sod again and again, her subtle movements, the way she scanned the floor. His jaw clenched. A muscle twitched near his temple. He sighed heavily and walked to a large mahogany cabinet. Unlocking it revealed a photo, an old family portrait. Mama Glory, glowing and pregnant, sat in a chair, the twins clinging to her sides. Josiah stood behind them, his hands on their shoulders. The picture was faded, the edges torn. He picked it up, kissed it, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I had no choice." 6 months ago, the church was collapsing from debt. A foreign investor had promised Josiah a bailout, money, expansion, fame, but only if he performed a sacrifice. The man, known only as Apostle Vono, said it had to be blood, pure blood. Innocent blood. Josiah resisted at first. But the hunger for power gnawed at him. The pressure from politicians and the public weighed down his shoulders. The television contracts. The book deals. The radio station. The university. The fame. He couldn't lose it all. And so, one stormy night, he did the unthinkable. Mama Glory had begged him. She thought he was joking. Until the very end. Now, every time he stepped on that altar, he felt the weight of what he'd done pressing from beneath, their bones, their silence, their stifled screams in the soil. But recently, the soil had begun to move. That night, as he tried to sleep, he heard them again, the twins giggling under his bed, and his wife whispering into his ear. You cannot preach over our graves and expect resurrection. Among the church's youthful voices was a girl named Tommy, a 17-year-old chorister with a haunting soprano voice that Pastor Josiah once called angel-breathed. She had recently begun having strange dreams, visions of a woman in a white lace dress, barefoot, standing under a dripping ceiling of stone. The woman always carried two little girls, their hair tied in twin buns, both humming a lullaby that Tommy couldn't recognize but always woke up singing. She told her choir director, who laughed it off as stress. But Tommy knew it wasn't. The dreams were always the same, always around 3:15 a.m. Every single time, just before she woke, the woman in white would whisper, "Tell him we are not sleeping." One evening after choir practice, Tommy lingered in the auditorium. The lights were dimmed, the security gone, and the pulpit sat like a silent judge. She felt a strange pull toward it, like invisible strings tugging at her spine. As she approached the altar, the lights flickered, and the air thickened. Then, without warning, the floor beneath her groaned. Tommy jumped back, heart racing. The groaning grew louder, and this time, she heard it clearly, a child's giggle echoing from underneath the altar, followed by what sounded like soft knocking. Panicked, she fled. But before leaving, she saw something that made her scream, a tiny handprint on the glass podium, smeared with what looked like dirt and blood. The following day, she tried to tell Pastor Josiah. But when she entered his office, he stared at her with such coldness she froze mid-sentence. "Some spirits don't want to be disturbed," he said calmly. "Let them rest, child." But Tommy knew. They weren't resting. Sod returned to the church again, this time accompanied by her friend and cameraman, Chuka, who worked freelance with an online investigative network. They came during the day under the pretense of doing a documentary on megachurches and the new Nigeria. Pastor Josiah reluctantly agreed, only after Sod used an old connection with a city councilman to gain permission. As they walked through the massive compound, Sod's eyes stayed sharp. She noticed the cracks near the base of the altar had been covered with fresh tiles. New marble. New grout. As if someone had been patching something up. "Zoom in here," she whispered to Chuka, pointing to a crack that ran crookedly toward the baptismal pool. "Look at how uneven it is. And smell that." Chuka sniffed the air. "Smells like disinfectant, and something else." That afternoon, Sod met an old mortician who had been forced into silence years ago. He remembered being called to help with a private burial at the church, no body, no coffin, just instructions to deliver soil and lime. He was paid triple his salary and warned never to speak of it again. "I thought it was a pet," the mortician said, trembling. "But the way they prayed over it, the way they wept before sealing the floor." Sod nodded grimly. She already knew. It wasn't a pet. It was a sacrifice. That night, she uploaded the story anonymously on a hidden platform. Within hours, her phone began to ring endlessly, calls from blocked numbers, emails with veiled threats. One message read simply, "They're not buried. They're waiting." Thank you listeners for listening to the end of part 1 of this story. I'd really appreciate it if, after enjoying this story, you could take a moment to like, share, subscribe and leave a comment. Your support means a lot and helps encourage me to keep sharing more stories. Bye.